Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. I am so delighted because I have been away and I haven't seen him in a while to have Pablo Torre back. Welcome, Pablo. Good to see you.
Jen, I've missed you. It's good to be back.
Absolutely. Now, we usually start off directly on sports, but it would seem weird to start without starting in Los Angeles. These stunning events, the militarization of our immigration system, these mass arrests. Give me your gut impression and your thoughts on what's been happening.
Yeah, my gut impression is that I don't know if people understand that Los Angeles is about 48% Latino Hispanic. And so when it comes to why this city, well, we start with the demographics, the basic demographics as destiny kind of perspective. And then you get to the mechanics of the convenient politics that this administration seeks out when it comes to vilifying such people, especially at a time when certainly it blows my mind, Jen, that I thought we might start with, as of Thursday, with Elon calling for the impeachment of Donald Trump and talking about the Epstein files and everything else therein. I thought we might talk about that. And the fact that we must lead with what seems to be a movement towards martial law, to be blunt, troops coming into Los Angeles, a major American city, for what appear, by any reasonable standard, to be incredibly distorted depictions of not just the causality, but the actual scope of the quote unquote insurrection and quote unquote invasion, as Stephen Miller has very conspicuously called it. All of it speaks to what I think is a fundamental question I'd like every American to ask themselves, which is, does this feel like a first world country? And it's not from the perspective of, look at all these people with these Mexican flags in the streets. I mean, from the perspective of our government. Like,
Yes,
this
exactly.
is textbook third world autocracy. And
Absolutely.
and Jen, I don't think that's a stretch at this point. And it started, of
No.
course, with CCOT and all that, but to this now here, it feels inescapable the way that America actually doesn't feel like America because of Trump.
We come back to this age-old question, which is how important are sports and how do you do sports in the midst of a political calamity? But in this case, it feels a little different because sports have become so internationalized and it is a meritocracy of black and brown and white. We don't hire the Pete Hegseths to play basketball. We hire the LeBron Jameses to find a point on it. How does sports perhaps like recenter the country? And how do people process like wanting to watch the NBA final at the same time their city is, being invaded?
Yeah, as always, this is a yes and kind of a story.
Yeah,
We do multiple things. We hold multiple truths in our head at the same time. I was just that.
right.
It's embarrassing. One big embarrassing confession I have for you. So when I was in LA a couple weeks ago, I went to my first game at Dodger Stadium.
Oh,
I had not been, and now
oh,
I,
I
I,
grew up
and
there.
oh, and I have been radicalized, Chen. Just a beautiful
Oh,
scene. The sunset, Chavez Ravine, all that stuff, right? It was better than it was on television.
yeah,
It's also very clear that when you walk into that stadium, it feels like Los Angeles,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's uh in every stratified way, from the people in the bleachers, the people in up top, the people down low. They're the celebrities, they're the famous, but then also there's just like the city that has been mischaracterized in the
yeah,
way that this administration would love you to mischaracterize it. And so to me, I mean, sports tends to be a pretty good check on what, and it's not always this way because sports can be also its own psychosis, but sports can be a pretty good check on like what a city's like. And
right,
so, if nothing else, it's a useful reminder that while all of this is happening um, in LA, there are also people gathering as we would aspire to do,
right,
that don't agree politically, that are largely normal, everyday people that are balancing what this
right,
administration is telling you is impossible, which
right,
is a multicultural society that
Exactly.
enjoys itself and can be proud of itself. And so it's
Exactly.
just it's a low bar, Jen, but it's also
Yes,
a real one. And we
I know.
do we do have the capacity to be reminded of it, even if it feels like there's some bread and some circus to the proceedings.
And I gotta say, as Trump is busy attacking universities and throwing foreign students out, you know, there are a lot of foreign students who play sports at places like Harvard and elsewhere. Does the sports community at this point say, hey, wake up. These are our guys. We got 30% of the teams at Harvard have foreign students of some type involved. What does that do to like college sports as you start whitening and Americanizing in the worst sense of the word? It's really just whiting, bleaching college sports. What happens then?
Yeah, I'm monitoring this very specific thing. I remember doing a story about the demographics of Harvard athletes when I was a student, when I was a senior. One of my big sort of like projects as a
Yeah,
newspaper writer was let's actually dig into the data and see like who is showing up at certainly Harvard's ball fields now and otherwise. Look, when you say whitening, you go back through the halls of a place like Harvard or any university, frankly, at this point, and you go through and see like what did it used to be like. Um, and it was phenomenally, and I say that as a matter of magnitude, extremely white. And so, yeah, look, the international presence, and I just think of the track team. I mean, look, every sport you can go down the line, but
sports, track, everything. Yeah.
but the thing that I'm reminded of, even more than the sports stuff with the Harvard story, which I, of course like have a particular investment in, is that Harvard produces a pipeline to the very thing that the conservative movement used to want. You
Yeah.
know, the most popular class at Harvard for decades was Introduction to Economics, and it was taught by a former Reagan chief economist named Marty Feldstein, who was my
Yeah.
professor. The number one job for Harvard graduates year after year after year, and it's still the case, was finance, followed by consulting, and now tech's in there too on the medal stand, those three things. But my point being that insofar as Harvard is a left-leaning place, sure, yes, this is true. But yes, and it is also feeding people in to the machinery of capitalism, which I thought was, again, part of the point. And so, whether it's sports, whether it's business, whether it's tech, all of these things, you're eroding again. It's really just a degradation of American exceptionalism. America used to be the
Absolutely.
place where international students wanted to play sports,
Yes.
wanted to study, wanted to, frankly, profit.
Yeah,
And now all of that is in jeopardy.
absolutely. Let's talk some more about college sports because there was something that happened recently that I don't think has registered with people, probably rightly so, because we've all been a little busy observing the erosion of our democracy and the rise of the police state. But be that as it may, there was a federal court ruling that finally settled a lawsuit. And the upshot is that universities, first of all, are going to have to pay out millions and millions of dollars to athletes, but they can pay these athletes directly. This is not just NIL money. This is not just, using their likenesses. We're talking about salaries. We're talking about paying people. Have we just crossed a Rubicon in sports? Have we now like opened the door to, we were kidding around, but BlackRock presents Harvard basketball, or the Boston Consultant Group presents North Carolina football? What are we doing here?
I would say that we're wading through the Rubicon at the moment.
Yeah. Okay.
And look, the river only flows one way. I should make that clear too. Like this is just a
Yeah.
matter of time. Um, but this is a story that I've been monitoring for a year. This has been waking its way through the court system. When I was, when we were watching the Olympics collectively, I got a call that resulted in an episode of my show. And the call from Paris was from the head coach of the US diving team. And the reason why this man was calling me was because this court case was going to result in revenue sharing, a capped system in which there was some decreed amount that an athletics department at a college was going to be permitted to split among its programs. And the reason the US diving coach called me was because he wanted to warn me and everybody that this is how diving dies. And so there are just some domino effects here, right? As we acknowledge the big headline, which is that, of course, college athletes have been for years mistreated and mischaracterized by an economic system that did not allow them to realize their own economic value. But at the same time, what we're seeing is a world in which Olympic sports, smaller sports, which used to be funded by football, are now in a market system going to be losing out to, surprise, football. And so, how do you divvy up the money? It goes to the programs that make the money, and that's really just football. Basketball, kind of, depending on the program, yes. But all of this is to say, Jen, that like, yeah, we're into the realm of what happens when the market does actually begin to realize, and that's messy. That is really
Absolutely.
messy.
And the 64, not thousand, but $1 million question is, does Title IX apply? And that is, how are we going to divide it between men's sports and women's sports? And our college is going to say, well, we're just going to use some other marker. It won't be gender, but it will be something else like attendance or some other metric. And women's sports also goes down the drain as a result of the money issue.
It's a really good question. And by the way, like the reason this has been taking so long to make its way through the court system is that it has been challenged. And it's not typically, I mean, look, yes, the challenge will be from the NCAA who has been fighting this, but also in the course of the settlement and the way it was actually decided upon, um, other constituents among the athletes have been fighting this. There
Right.
are real legal challenges. Now, this is the resolution of those challenges, but you can rest assured that there will be other objections based on Title IX and certainly based on, wait a minute, so you're now going to divide the money, but this is a decreed capped amount. So you're saying the market is being realized, and yet the market is not unencumbered. It has been restricted and constrained by some agreement with the NCAA and of course the litigants who are the former athletes who said we are overdue these payments. And so it's not over. I guess the Rubicon continues to push us in a direction.
Exactly. So we have these two forces acting on college sports at the same time. Coincidentally, maybe because we have this nexus of big money and Trump, although maybe those two things are more related than we would like to say. But we have the pressure that is potentially stripping out foreign athletes slash athletes of color. And we have a financial pressure that is going to, as you say, not democratize sports, but create a distinct hierarchy. What happened to the days where like people like going to the college World Series? They just had the women's softball World Series. Is that going to be like now this arcane doesn't get funded kind of backwater, or are we going to be able to see outside funders come in and then we really do have Vogue sponsors the Arizona women's sports team?
Yeah, I mean, it was, by the way, the World Series, the College World Series in softball was fascinating
Yes.
because the star player from Texas Tech was a transfer from Stanford who left Stanford because she was offered a record $1 million a year NIL deal. Kennedy, who is an incredible player who pitched every game, and that is why she wound up at
Right.
Texas Tech. Simultaneously, all this happening again, converging on the same timeline is both metaphor and reality because yeah, how do you afford that now? How do you
Yeah,
possibly afford that now? And so private equity is yet another shoe to drop.
exactly.
And look, the question for private equity when it comes to pro sports as well as college is the same. When your foremost motive is shareholder growth, economic value, profit, what does that do when your actual thesis as a sports team or program is winning. Those are not always the same thing. And so what
Exactly.
we're going to see is a conflict of interest between places that are trying to win and their backers, their stakeholders in private equity, which are trying to profit. And if it sounds dystopian, just understand that it is.
Yeah. Well, we dystopian would probably be like the word of the year at the end of the year, because that's kind of what we're living through.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's, as we reach our the last third of our show, talk a little bit about something that is pure joy, that is pure sports. And that was the French Open tennis champion. For the first time in like forever, we had the number one and the number two on both the women and the men's side. And we had both matches go the full length, 3 sets on the women, 5 sets on the men, ending in a tiebreaker. In these epic matches, what was your reaction to this? And what do you think this does for tennis, which has kind of been lagging, looking around for the next generation of stars? What does this do for the sport?
We can say something that we don't often say, given the aforementioned word of the year, which is that the future looks bright.
Yeah.
Coco Gauff, just to start chronologically, Coco Gauff, who started her career as a literal body double in a Serena Williams commercial, playing the young Serena, becoming her own entity, who has paid off all of the hype that we saw when I used to go watch her at the US Open, as a, still quite young, but as a teenager, as a younger teenager. Um, she has realized that promise, and it's spectacular, upsetting Sabalenka, who's the best in the world. The men's side, Alcaraz, 22 years old, Sinner, 23 years old, number 2 and 1 in the world, respectively, entering that final, giving us a final that not since Federer and Nadal have we seen. Just the caliber of of everything. I mean, it's just
I
one of the
know.
greatest sporting events, Jen, I've ever seen.
It
And
is.
it makes you just stand up on your couch. I mean, on top of your couch, frankly, and like you're Tom Cruise on a talk show and just clap. You're like,
Yes.
holy God. Like five
Yes.
and a half hours they
I
played.
know. I know. Just
Five and
and
a
the
half.
quality, as you say, on a shot where you think it's a miracle that one of them got it back, you see this phenomenal winner from like,
Every time.
practically
Every time.
and every match. And you have to also give credit for this. Really, we don't use the word enough, but character in sports. Alcaraz was down 2 sets to none, and it looked like the third set was not going to go his way. Similarly, Coco lost, the first set. So when I saw Coco, I thought, the best move she ever made, and with all due respect to him, was getting rid of Brad Gilbert,
Mm,
because she has now, I think, matured in a way and taken ownership of her own game in a way that maybe was harder under him. He used to hector her with like constant suggestions and chatter from, the box, makes you want to long for the days where you couldn't coach, from the stands. But now she has a maturity and a presence that you say, wow. And you do think of Serena Williams. Could she be the next great American star?
yeah. The way that tennis at its best resembles boxing at its best
Yeah.
is in this way. Um, I don't physically understand how they do it. And
Yeah.
in both of these cases, because they went to the limit, and in the 5.5 hour marathon, particularly, to be so at your peak at the very end of a race, at the end of a fight, at the
Yes.
end of a marathon, is inspiring in ways that make me feel um, things that only sports can provide, frankly.
Right. The human
Um,
potential, like
Human
the
potential.
digging down deep because you can do something you didn't think, you can do. And I also have to stress that both these winners are such gracious athletes
They're so likable.
and so likable and such mensches. And we've come to just accept that, oh, well, some of these sports heroes have to be jerks, but maybe not. Maybe we could have it all. Maybe we could have admirable people, great athletes. And I heard someone say it, maybe it was Alcaraz himself. You can't, and this is the boxing analogy, you can't play great tennis without a great opponent. You can't make that shot from the corner, getting back the impossible return and hitting a winner if the guy in the other court isn't that good. So
Right.
you need this, which is, I think, maybe we'll end on this. It's why tennis has always been best when you had these magical rivalries. McEnroe Borg, Connors and McEnroe, the three, greats of Djokovic and Nadal and Federer, Chrissy Everett and Navratilova. You can kind of go through the various eras and they have been so great. And so it is kind of gives me hope that we're going to kind of return to one of those eras. And I will say this, it was both sad and admirable and amazing in the semifinal match when you saw Djokovic, an aging hero, still playing great tennis. He fought for every point. It didn't go 5 sets, it was straight sets, but playing for every point. And afterwards, Alcaraz being so gracious and saying he's the best our sport has ever had. You know, can we all be better? Can we all be
I know
tennis?
it's really hard to not reach immediately for the closest metaphor to what we're seeing elsewhere, because here you have described optimism, a youthfulness, a frankly a way to contest an outcome that results in everybody having even greater respect than they entered with.
Yes,
And
yes,
these are such foreign concepts when it comes to our government right now, that
exactly.
sometimes sports is both escape but also North Star for what we're looking for.
Exactly. So I will end on this. Be a Carlos Alcaraz and not a Tom Homan. Be a Steffi Graf and not a Donald Trump. And maybe we'll have a chance. So thank you for returning to us, Pablo. It's always great to talk to you, and we will look forward to next week.
Vamos, as they say. Yes.
Take care. See you next week.
Thanks, Jen.